Modern civilization rewards urgency, faster responses, more productivity, more stimulation, more availability. We are constantly surrounded by the buzz of notifications, the pressure of financial targets, the glare of late-night screens. And somewhere along the way, we began treating chronic stress as normal, even admirable.
It has become the invisible water we swim in. We don't even notice the temperature rising. But modern neuroscience and endocrinology are pointing to something deeply alarming. The human body was never designed to remain in perpetual survival mode. We have taken an emergency system and turned it into our default state of being.
Which brings us to the core of what we need to unpack today. What if modern life doesn't run on money or time or even data? What if it actually runs on stress as its primary currency?
That is the exact paradigm shift we need to talk about. We are operating in what I call the cortisol economy. And to understand it, we first have to rescue cortisol's reputation. Cortisol is not the enemy. It gets a terrible reputation in wellness circles, but it is a fundamentally essential survival hormone. Without it, you couldn't wake up in the morning. You couldn't adapt to changes in your environment, respond to sudden danger, or maintain basic metabolic stability.
So it's essentially our biological ignition switch.
Precisely. The problem is not cortisol itself, the problem is chronic activation. Modern life has taken an emergency survival mechanism, a system meant to save your life for a few minutes at a time, and transformed it into a permanent biological operating system. And the body eventually pays a devastating price for that.
Let's go back in time for a second to understand how this was actually supposed to work. When we think about ancient humans, cortisol was what kept us alive in a harsh world, right?
Exactly. When early humans encountered a genuine physical threat, let's say a predator, the body had to rapidly mobilize energy. Cortisol flooded the system. It increased glucose availability in the bloodstream, raised alertness to absolute peak levels, mobilized fuel, and prepared the muscles for immediate, explosive action.
The classic fight or flight response.
Right, but here is the most crucial part of that evolutionary design. These stress responses were temporary. They were acute. The nervous system fully expected a period of deep recovery after the threat ended. You either escaped the predator or you didn't. But either way, the biological alarm bells eventually stopped ringing.
Meaning stress was designed to be a short burst, a sprint, not a marathon.
Beautifully said. It was an expensive biological maneuver meant to be used rarely. But look at how modern humans experience stress today. It is entirely different from our ancestors.
Because we aren't running from predators anymore. We are sitting perfectly still at a desk, staring at a screen while our heart rate does the exact same thing.
That is the great evolutionary mismatch. The human nervous system cannot fully distinguish between a physical threat to your life and a psychological threat to your ego or your livelihood. An aggressive email from your boss, financial instability, social comparison on digital platforms, chronic uncertainty about the future, sleep disruption. To your ancient brain, these are all predators.
So the brain is constantly screaming danger, but there's nowhere to run.
Exactly. These modern inputs continuously activate our stress circuitry. The body remains partially hyper-vigilant, not just for a few minutes, but for days, months, and sometimes years.
It sounds like modern civilization has effectively industrialized stress.
A profound observation. We have industrialized it, packaged it, and tied it to our survival in the modern world.
You've described this state of chronic stress almost like a biological debt. I find that metaphor fascinating. Can we dig into that?
Because that's exactly how it behaves on a cellular level. Think of your body's energy reserves like a bank account. Cortisol is a credit card. It allows the body to borrow energy temporarily to survive a crisis. But chronic activation becomes incredibly expensive. When you are constantly stressed, the nervous system overspends.
What exactly are we overspending?
Metabolic reserves, recovery capacity, sleep quality, hormonal stability, and deeply, mitochondrial resilience. The body begins financing your daily life through emergency physiology. You aren't running on natural, sustainable energy anymore. You are running on adrenaline and cortisol.
So when I push through a 14-hour workday using caffeine and anxiety, I'm not actually creating new energy. I'm just taking out a high-interest loan against my future health.
That is exactly what is happening. Modern humans are surviving by borrowing from future health. and the interest rates on biological debt are unforgiving.
That brings us to the cellular level, which I know is where this gets really intense. Let's talk about the energetic cost of this hypervigilance. Because stress isn't just an emotion, is it? It's deeply energetic.
Very much so. Chronic hypervigilance increases your body's energetic demand dramatically. The brain consumes enormous metabolic resources just maintaining that baseline of alertness, anxiety, threat scanning, and emotional regulation. It takes a massive amount of cellular fuel to constantly scan the horizon for danger.
And that fuel comes from the mitochondria.
Yes, the powerhouses of the cells. Over time, as they are forced to overproduce energy to sustain this false emergency, the mitochondria experience increased oxidative stress. The actual production of ATP, the energy currency of your cells, becomes less efficient. The engine starts to sputter.
Which explains the deep, bone-weary fatigue so many people feel today. It's not just that they didn't sleep well one night. Their cells are literally exhausted.
Exactly. Fatigue emerges, burnout follows.
So exhaustion is not a moral failing or a sign of weakness. It might simply be energetic depletion from prolonged survival signaling.
A very important distinction. We tend to judge ourselves for being tired, without realizing our bodies have been running a silent marathon every single day just to manage the baseline stress of modern existence.
And the tragic irony is that the more stressed we get, the harder it becomes to actually rest. Chronic cortisol seems to destroy the very mechanism of recovery itself.
Correct. Healthy biology requires a rhythmic oscillation between stress and recovery, a pendulum swinging back and forth. But chronic stress suppresses your restorative systems. It physically blocks the pendulum from swinging back.
How does that show up in the body?
Sleep quality declines. You might be unconscious, but your brain isn't resting. Your heart rate variability, or HRV, drops, which is a key indicator that your nervous system is stuck in gear. Systemic inflammation rises. Digestion weakens, because why would your body waste energy digesting food if it thinks a tiger is chasing you? Hormonal balance destabilizes. The body literally loses its physiological flexibility.
Meaning the nervous system forgets how to fully relax.
Exactly. You lose the biological memory of safety.
That is terrifying, but what makes it even worse is how society views this. Modern culture doesn't just ignore this biological crisis. It actively rewards chronic stress behavior.
It is a fascinating and tragic cultural paradox. Think about how people talk at networking events or even at family gatherings. Busyness, overwork, constant availability, functioning on 4 hours of sleep, these are worn as badges of honor.
We associate exhaustion with productivity and status. If you aren't stressed, people assume you aren't important or you aren't working hard enough.
Right. Stress becomes socially reinforced. But biologically, the body doesn't care about your job title or your social status. The body interprets this constant urgency as environmental instability. The nervous system remains trapped in survival adaptation because your lifestyle is telling it that the environment is hostile and demanding.
So, modern culture has essentially normalized biological self-destruction.
A deeply uncomfortable reality. We applaud people for slowly bankrupting their biology.
And what happens when that bankruptcy is finalized? Because eventually the body has to reach its physiological limits. The credit card gets declined.
Absolutely. I call this the endocrine bankruptcy model. When you push the system too far for too long, chronic stress contributes to a cascade of failures: metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, immune dysregulation, severe sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, and profound cardiovascular strain.
The system just collapses under the weight of the debt.
The endocrine system loses its adaptive capacity. It can no longer bounce back. The body becomes less resilient over time. And I want to be very clear about this. This happens not because humans are weak. It happens because our biology was never designed for endless activation.
Meaning, modern burnout isn't a psychological failing. It represents a systemic biological overdraft.
Beautifully said. It is the body finally saying, I have no more future energy to lend you. We are shutting down.
So, for anyone listening to this who feels that deeply, who recognizes that they are running on fumes, living in the cortisol economy and facing endocrine bankruptcy, how do we get out? How do humans rebuild biological resilience?
By actively and intentionally restoring recovery rhythms. And I don't just mean taking a vacation once a year, I mean daily physiological interventions. Prioritizing deep sleep, gentle movement that doesn't further spike cortisol, breath regulation to manually signal safety to the brain, sunlight exposure to regulate circadian rhythms.
What about the psychological side?
Crucial. Deep social connection, setting firm psychological boundaries with technology and work. We have to create moments of true parasympathetic safety. The nervous system must periodically remember, on a cellular level, that the threat is over.
It sounds like we need to reframe how we view rest. We treat rest as a luxury, or worse, as a void where productivity isn't happening.
That is the most toxic myth of the modern age. Recovery is not laziness. Recovery is biological reinvestment. It is the active process of rebuilding your cellular infrastructure so that you can actually experience your life, rather than just surviving it.
Meaning, true health is built through restoration, not permanent acceleration.
Exactly. You cannot speed your way to healing. You have to slow down enough for the body to repair the damage.
Perhaps the greatest illusion of modern life is believing humans can endlessly spend biological energy without consequence. We think we are invincible just because the damage is invisible.
Because every moment of chronic stress carries a metabolic price. Every sleepless night spent worrying, every unresolved tension held in the jaw and shoulders, every prolonged state of hyper-vigilance, they are all withdrawals from an account that has a finite limit.
And eventually the body demands repayment.
It always does. Because survival physiology was never meant to become our permanent identity. We were meant to survive, yes, but more importantly, we were meant to live.
A profound reminder to step out of the cortisol economy. Thank you for this deeply necessary conversation.
It was a privilege.